Right here, and always pleased when Congressman Brad Wenstrup joins the 55 KRC Morning Show, which he's doing today. Welcome back, Congressman Wenstrup. Always a pleasure having you on, even though you're not in studio, which is your preference and mine.
Yes. Well, it's a nice morning in D.C. We've already had baseball practice, getting ready for the congressional baseball charity game. And good to be on with you. Like you said, rather be in person. But here we are. This is the best part of the day in D.C. before I head to the Hill.
Yeah, I imagine. And you mentioned the baseball practice. It was just the 4th anniversary of the baseball practice, what could have been one of the most consequential mass shootings that our country's ever seen, had he successfully pulled it off. Does it seem like 4 years ago?
No, time is flying fast. I got to tell you, it does. And, we were all thinking about it at practice yesterday. And just goes through your mind over and over again. And, it really hasn't gone away. As you know, the things that have happened recently where, I had for the first time Christopher Wray, director of the FBI, in front of us. First time in over 3 years since he's been director. And it happened to be an Intel committee hearing. It was open, so it got some attention because it wasn't behind closed doors. And, the FBI back then had said that this was just suicide by cop when we've gone over the evidence over and over again. The guy was trying to kill Republicans. And that, Christopher Wray, to his credit, he gave me a call, and they changed their decision on that and called it act of domestic extreme terrorism, which it was. But it was funny, Brian, yesterday, Andrew McCabe, pretty much the disgraced former acting FBI director, who we didn't know in 2017 was so involved with the fake Russian collusion hoax that members of the FBI participated in, we realized that he was actually the director of the FBI on the day of the shooting, and maybe, just maybe, Brian, that's the reason it was called suicide by cop by the FBI, because he wouldn't dare say that a crazed leftist actually tried to kill Republicans and try to change the balance of power in the House of Representatives.
No, that can't be. I never believed that he would stoop so low. And I guess, does this change now? I know that the federal government or the Biden administration is going to concentrate its efforts on white supremacist domestic terrorists. I mean, does this illustration here, I don't recall a right-wing effort at mass shooting of elected officials. Now, someone might quickly retort, well, what was January 6th? And I still don't know what the hell January 6th was, but mixed bag of crazy people. But you don't have the same kind of, you can't point to an individual, rather, that tried to take out so many members of Congress with multiple firearms on the right-wing side of the ledger, do you?
No. And, so the Democrats put forward and brought to the floor the vote to, I believe it stalled in the Senate, a vote to bring forth a 1-6 commission to study all of the events of that day and how we're protected or where we're vulnerable and this and that. I offered an amendment in Rules Committee that said, look, if you are very interested in protecting the physical structure of the Capitol, and especially as well as protecting those that work in the Capitol, members of Congress, staff, and therefore also protecting those that visit the Capitol if they're ever allowed to do that again, then this should include the events of June 14, 2017, where if not for Capitol Police being there, he might have killed 20 to 30 people. And they voted that down. So that tells they really want this as some kind of political tool. They're not serious about trying to address the safety and security of the Capitol and those that work there.
I'm not shocked by that either, Congressman Wenstrup.
Yeah.
But, I see, you did something like that. Had they agreed to it, and really, other than politics, why wouldn't you want to get to the bottom of something like that? Because there, but for the grace of God, go I. Oh, my God, we got a left-wing nut job trying to kill members of the Republican side. Here I am on the left-wing side of the equation going, well, I'm afraid as I can be of these right-wing extremists, these racist white guys, and you might want to be able to have a little greater insight into why a left-winger wanted to do that, simply because it just, again, there, but for the grace of God, go I. It could be a right-winger next time trying to take out Democrats in Congress.
Well, forget the motive altogether, just the very premise, right?
Yep.
When members of Congress are gathered together like that, what is the protective force that is around them.
Yeah.
Do they have enough? I mean, you think about it, you had 2 Capitol Police with handguns. You had a guy with a high-powered rifle and a handgun. And when Alexandria Police showed up, that's when they finally took him down, because one of the Capitol Police was already down. She was shot in the ankle. Don't you want to consider, like, maybe what do the police, first of all, should the police be there? Yes. Which wasn't a given. They were only there because Steve Scalise is there. So should the police be there? Yes. What should they be armed with? What should they be prepared for? And were they prepared for it on that day? So all of these things should be part of it. And also on Good Friday, you had the guy who drove up at the barricade and killed one of the Capitol Police. Shouldn't that be part of this commission? If you're truly interested in protecting the Capitol, that guy who drove up to the barricade, he could have been a Timothy McVeigh. He could have driven a vehicle up that exploded, and all these types of things. So it tells me you're not serious when you can just brush off these very, very violent events as though they're nothing, and then just say, no, we're only going to focus on the 6th of January, which I'm okay with focusing on it, no problem. But let's not make it so one-sided, and that's what they were trying to do.
Jeez. Well, I'm glad you at least endeavored to do it, because you did reveal them for the people they are, which are just, very politically motivated and not interested in really reaching the ultimate conclusion, at least a conclusion that will include the reality that there are left-wing extremists out in the world as much as there are right-wing, maybe even more.
Well, and you can also go into all the violence of last summer and attacks on federal buildings. I mean, we could make it even broader on how well our federal structure is protected. All of these types of things, that'd be a good thing. But the other thing about that commission is there's already been 3 investigations. So, I'm really not sure what they're trying to accomplish except for maybe a political end. But it looks like it's somewhat stalled. So.
Well, that's all well and good, and thank God for the Senate and the filibuster, which I know the Democrats would love to get rid of it. I don't think that's a very smart idea, honestly. I'm not an advocate for that, even if the Republicans were in power, because the idea of flip-flopping back and forth every time a new administration comes in is really it's a recipe for disaster. How could we ever possibly plan our lives, our futures, whether it's business or anything else, if the rules keep changing, like executive orders, every time you get a new president?
Yeah, on the filibuster, they hated it till they liked it, and then they liked it until they hated it. And so I, seem pretty certain, at least so far, that Joe Manchin and likely Kristen Sinema in the Senate are both going to stick to the filibuster. Actually, it works well for Joe Manchin, to be honest with you, and Kristen too, but his degree, some people say, like, Joe, why don't you just become a Republican? You're pretty moderate, and, why don't you just become a Republican? Well, that would take his power away. Then he's there with Mitch McConnell. And there he sits, and he's the Democrat who's saying no, and that makes him one of the most powerful people in the country.
Well, which, at least insofar as the filibuster is concerned, he's the make or break guy, and so far he's standing fast because he knows who his constituents are. I mean, come on. West Virginia isn't the blue state it used to be. They're very red now, and he's lucky to have a job as a Democrat. And the only reason he has a job as a Democrat is because he's a conservative Democrat, or at least more so.
Yeah, he's more moderate, and he listens to his people a little bit more than a lot of members of Congress sometimes, and that's kept him in office. And he walks a fine line, and but I think he's doing what I think is best for the country, and I've heard him say that. Now, I hope we hold it to him. I was at a bipartisan event with him, a month or 2 ago, and he said, "No, I'm going to stick to it." So he said it with people from media around the table as well. So hopefully that will stick, and we'll be a better country for it.
No doubt about it. Congressman Wenstrup, don't go away. We have plenty more to talk about. We'll want to thank you for introducing the 55 KRC Morning Show audience to Maryland Congressman Andy Harris yesterday. He was blackballed for questioning Dr. Fauci. We'll talk a little about Fauci. We'll talk about budget. We'll talk about inflation. We'll continue with Congressman Brad Wenstrup. After I'm Thomas here with Congressman Wenstrup. Filling the hour, we're going to hear from, of all people, Congressman Wenstrup. Guess who's coming up at 8 o'clock? Dennis Kucinich.
Oh, wow.
He wrote a book called The Division of Light and Power about his period of time as Cleveland's mayor, fighting corruption and bad guys and corporate cutthroat competition, et cetera, et cetera. So it should be a rather interesting conversation with him. Joe and I were debating earlier on whether it would be a bright idea or a wise idea to ask him what his advance was on the book. Anyway, coming up at 8:05, Dennis Kucinich, and, of course, Judge Anna Napolitano in a little more than an hour, 8:30. So we'll listen to that. And if you are just tuning in, you're like, oh, I didn't hear the first part of his conversation with Brad, well, that podcast will be up on my blog page after the show is over. So on to other things. I thank you for Dr. Harris, by the way. Dr. Congressman Wenstrup. We talked to Maryland Congressional Dr. Andy Harris yesterday about the blackballing that went on during the his comments about COVID and questioning Dr. Fauci. Obviously, it's a problem that continues. And you, as a doctor, and I'm going to plead with you and anybody else who can, within earshot, as I have been, can we naturally immune folks who struggled and survived COVID-19 please be included among the category of people who are safe, like the vaccinated? I mean, everybody's talking about vaccine cards and employers insisting that if you don't get the vaccine, that you're not going to be able to work at your job anymore. Hey, I've got as much immunity as a vaccinated person, according to, of all places, the Cleveland Clinic, who looked at thousands of cases along these lines. Please, do you disagree with what I say in that regard, Congressman Wenstrup?
No, I don't. I mean, this is what happens, right? This is the beauty of our immune systems, is that we develop a fight against something that's invading our body. Sometimes we don't win that fight, as we see with COVID, right? But many times we do, in your case, and in many millions of people that got COVID and got better. And you know, you place like the Cleveland Clinic where you're studying what's your level of antibodies, how protected are you, how many people that have had it once are getting it twice. That's a good indicator right there. It has happened, reportedly, but I can only remember reading that one time.
Once.
Yeah, so I mean, that's the whole premise about herd immunity without a vaccine. Then you take herd immunity with a vaccine, that exponentially changes your herd immunity. Does that make sense? I hope I said that clearly. But, you know, you have more protected people, right? You have people protected because they've had it and survived, and hopefully no long-term side effects from that, but there may be some that we may see 10, 20 years from now. And then you have the people that have been vaccinated and have immunity. And this is what Dr. Macri has been saying over and over again, if you've ever seen him on TV. I was trying to get Fox to try and encourage Dr. Fauci to debate Dr. Macri from Johns Hopkins. I thought that would be a good debate. And,
he said no.
Well, Brian Kilmeade said Fauci will never come on and do
Of course.
Anyway, but, you know, I was glad you had Dr. Harris on. That was a very, very good interview. I would encourage people that didn't hear it to take a listen on your podcast, as I was able to do later, because
I appreciate it.
I couldn't hear it live, but you just did a really good job, and he did too. But his situation where he was merely talking about things that physicians were using that seemed to be helping, and, you know, other forms of science that can be other tools for us, and somebody decided that they were going to take him up with the Maryland Medical Board and say he should have his license revoked. This is ridiculous. I mean, you've got the situation where Facebook was not allowing anyone to post anything about the gain of function research, where you change a virus to make it more infectious, or that the virus was possibly engineered through that process. They were taking it down, wouldn't allow it up, and then suddenly in the last few weeks they said, we're going to allow it again. What is the society we're living in with these types of actions being taken place?
I don't know, and the same thing stood for those who are advocating the use of hydroxychloroquine, which I guess now, much like the argument that it couldn't have originated in a lab, and if you suggest that, you're a nut job conspiracy theorist who needs to be banned from social media. Same thing early on when hydroxychloroquine was mentioned. As soon as I think a whole lot of people would have gotten it, Dr. Brad Wenstrup, had Donald Trump not mentioned it as an option. Is almost as if once the word hydroxychloroquine or Wuhan Institute of Virology as a potential source left the lips of evil Orange Man, it immediately became verboten to even discuss it, talk about it, and of course, to do so, you were labeled a nut.
Yeah, a couple of things. Don Carl from ABC recently came out and saying, well, the methodology in reporting a year ago was if Donald Trump said it, then it can't be right. And he said it turns out he was right about a few things.
It's a whole bunch of stuff.
But the other thing is too, and I said this early on, and I said it to Secretary Azar, America needs to be hearing from the people that are treating the patients. You have an epidemiologist and virologist, he's a doctor, but not necessarily a physician, if I could sort of split the meaning of that. He's not hands-on with patients. And he's looking at a virus. And, what I think really hurt America through this process, and it happened at local levels too, is we weren't hearing about all the bad things that were happening because we were locked down. We weren't hearing enough about the depression and suicide, the misdiagnoses of cancers, et cetera. We had a guy commit suicide because his hernia operation was canceled and he was in so much pain. That was right here in Adams County. I mean, you had all these things. You didn't hear that being talked about. But when it comes to these things that were working, Brian, I had doctors in Ohio texting me, calling me, saying, I've been using hydroxychloroquine on my patients, because look, here's a doctor who's like, I've got something that's safe and may be effective and certainly does no harm, and I'm using it and they're getting better. So why should I not be doing this? But you're right. Once Donald Trump said it, then everyone was belittled, and people, in many cases, ran and hid because they were afraid to even say they were using it.
We'll pause. We'll continue the topic. Fire Fauci, of course, is a movement that's going on. Will that happen? We'll also hear about inflation and the budget. More with Congressman Brad Wenstrup. After Congressman Brad Wenstrup, just going through the issues. Before we leave the idea of COVID and all that, the Fire Fauci movement, there's been some legislation proposed to fire him. I guess the way I feel about it, Congressman, you pointed out earlier he is not necessarily a diagnostician in the sense he doesn't see patients, so he doesn't have that connection. He's like a research scientist more like, but he also lied to us.
Yeah,
I mean that to me, when you have just lost your credibility with, I think it should be most Americans. I mean, he had information and new things about the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and he lied to us, bald-faced, and actually it was multiple times. No, not doing gain-of-function research, blah, 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 blah. And it turns out, not only are they doing gain-of-function research, we are funding it, perhaps illegally, I don't know. But also, they were doing bat research there, and in spite of the fact we were told that they weren't in live bats in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, they had live bats there as well. So lie after lie after lie, and here we are. And he's still got his job, and he's still the highest paid person in the federal government.
Yeah, we could certainly slash the budget a little bit, I guess, if we removed certain position. The highest paid person is kind of unbelievable. There's no doubt he's a brilliant man. I've known of him for years. I visit the National Institute of Health. Everyone talks about all his work in this arena. There's no doubt about it. He is brilliant in the lab. But, I think sometimes scientists, they're always curious, and they're always maybe going a little bit too far. Last year when this whole thing started, Brian, I started doing research with another doctor in Ohio, A.J. Seth, and we were digging things up, and he was contacting infectious disease doctors in China. We were looking for what do they know? What have they used? Including hydroxychloroquine, what's working, this and that. But we started finding out other things in the research. Chinese have been talking about bioterror for some time, found an article from 2003. The gain of function research, we found an article from 2015, which we found out Fauci actually included in his emails, and it was from a guy named Ralph Barrett from North Carolina, an expert who's now saying that this thing could have been engineered. And he was working on gain-of-function research with a Chinese scientist, Dr. Shi. And now, this was done. The U.S. said, no, we're going to put a pause on it. Now, I don't know yet exactly who put the pause on it or why, but the Chinese continued the research, and they wrote about it. So they've been doing this type of genetic engineering. for whatever reason. They say they want to understand tougher viruses better. Well, why would you necessarily want to create a virus that's more infectious to human beings and run that risk? That's where I stand on that. Leave it alone and try not to do that. But that's what was taking place. And then you just review Dr. Fauci's emails and compare it to his public statements.
Right.
He gets an email on January 31st of 20 that's from an immunologist who said, this thing looks like it may have been engineered. And he goes, oh, okay, thank you. And then he immediately sends an email to his deputy, a guy named Hugh Alchinschloss, and says, important in capital letters. And he sends the article by Barrick and Dr. Shi from, I believe, 2015.
Yep.
And so he's concerned about this, right? And he says, be by your phone. I'd love to know what the phone conversations were about. And at the same time, we're sending money to the Eco Health Alliance, which is sending money to the Wuhan lab. And then later in May of 20, Fauci comes out and says it's unlikely that it was engineered, and he gets a thank you from the director of the Eco Health Alliance.
Ah.
Saying this. So, I mean, you don't have to be Columbo to think that something doesn't look right here, right? And so this is where we're investigating, going further. I'm trying to dig deeper into this and using the resources I have at the Intelligence Committee to try and, dig deeper into what we know is going on in China because we're not getting help from China. And that's the other thing. If they didn't do anything, open up your doors. You can, just because you were doing that type of research does not mean you did anything wrong necessarily. But when you cover it up and act like it wasn't taking place, then people are suspicious, and rightfully so.
Amen. Appreciate that summary, Congressman Wenstrup. Don't go away, because I see that today may be the day that Chucky Schumer triggers a reconciliation process as it relates to Biden's $2.25 trillion American Jobs Plan and a $1.8 trillion American Families Plan. When will the printing press stop? When and will this ultimately go through? Can they get it through even with reconciliation? That with Congressman Wenstrup. Happy Wednesday. Brian Thomas here with Congressman Brad Wenstrup. Does the Republican Party abandon the concept of restraining on spending and concerns about deficits? Congressman Wenstrup, I know that sounds like a rhetorical question. It probably is. But we had 4 years of Trump. We could have used 4 more, but we know what we got. Didn't see any efforts at all to rein in the spending in federal government. And I certainly don't see any now. $2.25 trillion American Jobs Plan, $1.8 trillion American Families Plan, and Chucky Schumer talking about convening a meeting with all 11 Democratic members of the Budget Committee today to begin this reconciliation process, which seems to me to throw the whole concept of the filibuster out the window. I'm not the reconciliation idea that you can pass a law through Congress without getting 60 votes in the Senate is like the peace of God. So you might help explain that to my listeners and me. But where are we on this, Congressman Wenstrup?
Yeah, so reconciliation is a tool that, clearly both parties have used. We did it for the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. But there was a difference between what we did with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, because revenues to the government actually increased because more people went to work and more businesses stayed in the United States of America and more businesses were growing in the United States of America. So it is kind of a tricky process, and there are restrictions to it. But it's to take a budget and then modify it, if you will, and put things in place. So they have to be, I think, germane to the budget, and it gets a little bit tricky. And there's even more rules about it in the Senate than there are in the House.
Well, this doesn't go before a court of law to meet the criteria that are whatever germane happens to mean in the context of this budget reconciliation process. Right. Who does that, and is there any way of contesting whatever conclusions are reached to the extent the items are in there that can't be used via reconciliation?
Yeah, as far as I know, historically, Brian, it's really up to the parliamentarian in the Senate. So, we couldn't even ask. So as we were doing Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, we had to make sure we were staying within the rules that we're going to pass muster in the Senate and really try to figure that out in advance, because if the parliamentarian strikes it down, it's over. So it's really an interesting concept. But like I said, we've used it. They used it. When you talk about the spending, when we were in phase 2 last year, still under the Trump administration, somebody asked me, what's phase 3 look like? And my answer was, how are we going to pay for all of this? We need to start addressing that, or at least, and also prepare for the future for anything like this again, so it just doesn't become this spending bonanza that doesn't really help us in the long term. It helps us in the short term. And a lot of that stuff was necessary to keep businesses afloat, et cetera. Now we've seen it just being used to just continue to spend. I know that President Trump was hoping for a second term, and at that point he wanted to start addressing spending. I think he said, let's get through this first term, then we got to start hitting that. So that didn't happen, and here's where we are now, and they're just ready to just keep on going because there seems to be no limit that would bother them. There's no point that it would say, oh, that's a little too much. We can't go there. And when it comes to an infrastructure bill, regardless of how it's done, it's not real clear if Manchin and Sinema would even vote for a purely partisan infrastructure bill.
That was it, because a lot of what is in there is not infrastructure as the normal, sane, sort of using the Webster's dictionary version of project is. This is a lot of brand new Green New Deal projects and regulatory environments and burdens like that. So you have to be really all in favor of going full green at a massive expense to America's economy. And I don't think either Sinema or Manchin are of that ilk. I don't know if they're cut from that chunk of cloth, Congressman Wenstrup.
I don't think that they are, but we'll see. But when Biden started calling people in, I know Kevin McCarthy went there and they were asking him, "Are you interested in an infrastructure bill? Would you be willing to work with us on an infrastructure bill?" And first thing out of Kevin McCarthy's mouth was, well, I think the first thing we have to do is define infrastructure. What are we talking about? What is it that we are trying to achieve, and what does infrastructure look like? And then we can start talking from there. Well, we've seen what they consider infrastructure to be, and it's a lot of things that we don't consider infrastructure to be. It goes way off on tangents. So that's a good starting point, is to define what infrastructure looks like. And, Mitch McConnell seems interested to see what will happen out of all this. But if there's no give and take, it's going to be a partisan event. And, I can tell you in the House, we want to see what infrastructure looks like. And if these are hard infrastructure projects, fund them and pay for them. Pay for them in our time. We certainly find ways to do that, and it's not through higher taxes, because that's exactly what will hurt our economy at a time as we're coming out of this COVID event. And the last thing we need for our supply chain is to run manufacturers out of this country. We need them coming to this country. We need to be able to produce domestically. So there's a lot of unintended consequences to some of the things that they're proposing, especially when it comes to the pay for.
No question about that. And anyhow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. It's just so dang frustrating to me that we get away with this. Just pay this forward, pay it down, kick down the road. Let our kids pay for it. Let our kids pay for it. $27 trillion worth of that. I mean,
I remember on the last bill, the Democrats are on the floor, the $1.9 trillion. And they're saying this is historic. This is going to be historic. This is going to be so consequential. And I said, it is historic, and it will be consequential. And I'll tell you who's not going to like it. The next couple of generations of Americans that you're sticking with the bill.
Yeah.
When you look at a bill, you should be asking yourself, does this give Americans more freedom? And will the next generation say thank you? And if they're not going to say thank you, you barely better reconsider what you're doing. Frankly, Brian, we're living in the most selfish generation America's probably ever seen, with the way they're just willing to spend and then pass the bill on to others. The World War II generation, we got into debt because of the war, but we saved democracy, we saved the world, and they came back and started to turn things around and say, here's what we did for the next generation. We saved the world, and we're going to work to sustain it.
Amen. Hold on, one more with Congressman Brad Wenstrup. We'll be back. 751, 55 KRCD Talk Station. Subject matter that I don't think enough people are talking about. I'm going to ask Congressman Brad Wenstrup now. I note that a report in May showed that the Border Patrol apprehensions were up 700% compared to the same time in 2020 under the old Trump rules. Of course, Joe Biden, is his first day in office, basically gutted every single one of Donald Trump's executive orders, including those relating to the border. And immediately we saw this unbelievable surge coming toward our southern border. The problem is obvious. The coyotes are making tons of money. It's basically an advertisement from the federal government to come on in because we're not enforcing border security. Will anything at all be done about this? Because Texas is going it alone. They're so bad down there.
Well, Texas has been. When I went down there, we did get a brief by some of the people from the state, and they were doing everything they could to assist Border Patrol. Keep in mind, our Border Patrol agents have been pulled away from actually doing patrol, and they're really just processing people that walk right up to them. But they're also, with all the unaccompanied children, they have become child care providers, sometimes health care providers. There was one area, Brian, it was 23 miles with only 3 people actually patrolling the border.
That's ridiculous.
When Biden took away the Return to Mexico plan, that gave a business plan to the cartels. And it gave them a much better business plan as far as their profits and the evil deeds that they do, because now it said, okay, so if you have anyone 7 years old or younger, as though they have an ID, which they don't, but 7 years old or younger, then we're not going to send them back to Mexico, and we're abandoning that plan altogether anyway. So some are being returned to Mexico still, but at the same time, if you have somebody 7 or under, that's all you need. And so a group would stay, and the children would stay. We even had incidents where they've picked up the same child twice. So that means the child came in, broke away from everything, went back, and then came in with another group.
Recycle.
This is all a moneymaker for cartels, right? They steal children, they buy children, and sometimes people, sadly, are paying to have their children taken into America. And so at the same time as all that's going on, then you have all the drug running and everything else that they're much more successful at. President Trump is going to go down at the invitation of Governor Abbott.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a very interesting event that I hope gets some coverage.
I mean, I just have to observe. I think the only reason Kamala Harris has not gone to the border is because it'll draw attention to the problems at the border. You can't avoid it. Every human being in elected capacity or otherwise who's been down there is like, look, it's happening right in front of me. There's a group of 40 people crossing the Rio Grande at this point. It's like, there they go. And apprehensions are up 700%. I mean, that just means that the number of people who didn't get apprehended and crossed in illegally undiscovered is probably up about 700%. Fentanyl seizure is up over 300% compared to last May. There's a little problem for society, right?
Yeah, and that's just what we're catching, Brian.
Exactly, what we're catching.
And it's a numbers game, and they're winning that numbers game. It's overwhelming on every front, and this is the situation. Like I said, Joe Biden gave the cartels a successful business plan to operate under.
Well, and cartels are going to get paid whether they're successful or not, because I suspect they get their money up front.
They get their money. They are basically human traffickers, and they're getting away with it, and people wonder why. Well, you shouldn't wonder why. And it's just really revolting that she supposedly, Kamala Harris, is in charge of this and hasn't gone there. And what did she say the other day? Well, I haven't been to Europe either.
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
Real funny, laughing matter. Children abused. Can you imagine the horrific abuse that these young children are facing as they trek across Mexico, led by evil gang members and coyotes, and probably among a group of people that will include a whole host of pedophiles? And then, maybe even sold into human trafficking once they get here. It's just the list in the parade of horribles is awful. And they leave the border open all in the name of compassion. It's ridiculous.
No one comes in without the cartels, and the cartel network does not end at the river. It extends into the United States of America with stash houses where they hold people until their bill is paid, and who knows what else. And so the reality is there. God bless Governor Abbott for standing up for his state and really for the whole country, and hopefully we'll see some fruitful at least acknowledgement of what's going on from the Biden administration after President Trump goes down there.
Well, there's going to be a response. Looking forward to it. My popcorn's out. Congressman Brad Wenstrup, a real pleasure having you on today. Thanks for going on with all these topics in the hour and spending time with my listeners and me. I'll look forward to doing that again. And between now and then, I hope you and your family stay well.
You too. Good hour. You got a good hour coming up.
Thanks, brother. Take care.